Welcome to Wealthy Behavior, talking money and wealth with Heritage Financial, the podcast that digs into the topics, strategies, and behaviors that help busy and successful people build and protect their personal wealth. I'm your host, Sammy Azuz, the president and CEO of Heritage Financial, a Boston-based wealth management firm working with high net worth families across the country for longer than 25 years. Now let's talk about the wealthy behaviors that are key to a rich life. On this episode of the podcast, I have a special guest, my colleague and a longtime advisor at Heritage Financial, Kenzie Ferris. Kenzie's passionate about helping women with their finances and wanted to jump on the podcast to share some insights and observations she's picked up during her career to share with our listeners. So Kenzie, welcome to Wealthy Behavior.
Hi, Sammy. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. This is stuff we've been talking about for years, and I'm excited to have you walk our listeners through it. So in working with female clients, and I know that's not the only client type you have, but it is a client type that you're passionate about and obviously resonates strongly with you. And you've been one of the leaders of our Her Heritage initiative here at Heritage Financial to help empower our female employees and give them career development opportunities, but also update and improve some of the ways that we work with a segment of our clients. You have three challenges that you see that you wanted to highlight, but at the same time provide potential solutions for. So could you walk us through those?
Absolutely. Yeah. So men and women are different, especially when it comes to wealth planning, whether it's balancing motherhood, demanding more pay on the job, facing divorce or loss of a spouse, being a breadwinner, planning for retirement, or just living longer. We want to provide expertise and resources to women who need help to reach their goals and also plan for a secure and fulfilling retirement. So some of the challenges that we come across in working with our female clients is women are twice as likely to be widowed than men. The average age of a widow is 59. 32% of women over the age of 65 are widowed compared to just 11% of men. Half of widows over the age of 65 will outlive their husband by 15 years. And 80% of men die married, while 80% of women die single. So we need to plan for this.
Wow. Those are some eye-opening stats, Kenzie. When you say, ladies, we need to plan for this, how should they be planning for that?
So 90% of women will be in charge of their finances at one point in their lives. So this might sound really daunting to some individuals. And that's why we believe it's really important for women to be involved in their finances at all times during their lives. Whether you're working with your advisor to build a financial plan, making sure you're keeping track of it, explore long-term care insurance. It might not be for everyone. Make sure your estate plan is updated. And most importantly, be comfortable with your advisor. That's the person you will be calling when something does happen to your partner.
Great advice. And even if you're not the one who enjoys the finances the most, don't take years off from being involved in those meetings. I would say kind of make it clear to the people that you're working with and also to your spouse. We need to structure these meetings in a way where I can get what I need out of it without going into details that I don't think I need right now.
Absolutely.
So that's a pretty big challenge to start us off. What's the second one?
Another challenge we see is what we call the sandwich generation. So taking time away from work to raise your family, re-entering the workforce many years down the road, and then having to take time to care for aging parents or other family members. Most of these challenges fall on women. There's some challenges to saving that you need to be aware of and try to get ahead of. So you might spend more of your own money to help care for others. Caregiving can affect women's ability to save as it takes you out of the workforce. And working less hours also reduces the amount of Social Security benefit that you qualify for in retirement. Not to mention, this can be emotionally, physically, mentally, and financially demanding. Burnout and time management and financial difficulty are just some of the challenges that women face.
So besides kind of the as you mentioned, the burnout and the mental challenges, these are financial pressures and just financial realities you have to deal with, the career interruption, the kind of the unpaid caregiving later. Not guaranteed that it's going to hit you, but how would you advise women who are listening who have experienced that or worry that they're going to face that to best prepare for it?
Having conversations with your spouse, your partner, your parents early and often is key. Having a plan in place, working with your advisor to build different scenarios into your financial plan to see how taking time away from work may impact the plan long term. Come up with solutions now. You might need to work a little longer, cut back on expenses. When talking with your parents about their assets, find out what their plan is, what their wishes are. Do they have long-term care insurance? What does it cover? Do they have an emergency fund that might cover expenses until their long-term care insurance benefits kick in? Most of the time, there's a waiting period where you need to pay out of pocket. Making sure that you're working with your family to look into assisted living facilities. Is their estate plan up to date? Are their assets owned properly? Are beneficiaries updated? Again, having these conversations and getting comfortable with discussing your finances with your family will hopefully make any transitions easier down the road. It's also easier to sort of clean up account ownership and beneficiaries before something does happen. It can be very timely and costly to do so after someone has passed away.
You mentioned talking to your parents about whether they have long-term care insurance, in case you are going to have to help take care of them or take care of your in-laws. I would imagine, and you touched on it in the prior challenge, I would imagine that long-term care is important for female clients as well in both of these situations. I have a hard time getting people to take long-term care seriously, even though we talk to them a lot about it, because they see the costs, they see the cost increases, they've potentially heard that it's difficult to deal with some of these carriers when you need it. You are a certified long-term care specialist. How do you think long-term care fits into these conversations? But more importantly, what would your general advice be to somebody who's skeptical about it, given that we've talked about it now as an important potential solution in two of the two challenges we've mentioned?
So one of the first things we do here at Heritage is we will build a financial plan for you, and could build a long-term care insurance event into the plan to see how it does impact your assets in the future. So that is usually pretty eye-opening to clients when we build a $200,000-$300,000 a year event into the future. Being able to offset some of the cost of long-term care insurance is easier to stomach than fully covering the cost on your own. Sammy, you and I have had clients in the past where if you're calling us for $25,000 a month for care coverage, it can be a lot, especially on someone who is taking care of their spouse.
Absolutely. I do share this all the time with people who think about quote unquote self-insuring because they have enough assets. It's one thing to say you're going to do that when you're 40s or 50s and 60s, but maybe, if they could talk to some of our clients who are in their 80s, who, their spouse that's been their whole life is not doing well, and they're taking huge chunks out of the portfolio to care for them, even though their plan had been to self-insure all along. It's not a comfortable place to be. So from my vantage point, and we've talked about this with clients together, it's at least make an informed decision. Look at the costs, don't write it off, strongly consider it. We don't sell insurance, as I've said before on this podcast, but I always feel like, in particular, that client challenge that you started with, which is the younger female spouse, or maybe the younger female spouse in a second marriage, should have long-term care and much more serious long-term care conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially with women living longer than men, and then the chances of a female needing long-term care insurance are high.
So this next challenge, I want to tee up a little bit, because you were the first person to kind of bring this to light here at Heritage, and to me, again, with your leadership and the Her Heritage initiative. Saying you work with female clients, that's not really a client niche, right? That's 50% of the population. So some of the stuff that we talked about up until now, I think we are both highly confident that, captures a large segment of our female clients or potential female clients, right? The statistics on widowhood, living longer, caregiving, sandwich generation, caring for your family. The next one that I'm about to ask you is a little bit more of in the generalization camp. That definitely doesn't apply to all the female clients that we work with, but it does apply, I think, to enough that we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on it. And that is that sometimes people are uncomfortable talking about their finances. They're not confident. They don't enjoy the topic. And that statistically speaking, money and finance are discussed less among women than men.
Absolutely. And we hear this constantly when we go to conferences and the webinars and everything that we watch and listen to on a regular basis. Again, going back to the statistics, they're pretty shocking. By 2030, women could control $30 trillion and make up about 80% of consumer spending. And women are less confident than men when it comes to having enough money to live comfortably in retirement, overwhelmed by all the ways that you can invest your money, having adequate emergency funds, and rebalancing their portfolios. We are seeing a shift in younger women that tend to be less constrained by traditional gender stereotypes. But I mean, growing up, I can even remember my grandmother telling me to never talk about money. And times could not be more different today. So it's really important to understand your money story, your relationship to money, and the story behind it. Your thoughts, beliefs, attitudes, feelings about money. If you go back and think of one of your first memories of money, you may realize that that instance could have potentially impacted how you think about money and how you make your decisions today. Just a quick story. One of my first memories about money was when I was working a summer job in high school. I really wanted this Louis Vuitton bag, and my mother was clearly not going to buy it for me. When I was working, I was making $6 something an hour, and I worked many, many weeks to save up enough for that bag. So proud when I bought it. And I'm happy to say that I still have that bag, and it's actually worth more now than it was when I purchased it. So that was my first investing experience without realizing it at the time. But that experience really made me become aware of money. So much that when I was looking at colleges and I made what I believe was a wise financial decision and decided to attend a school where I would come out with a fraction of the student debt upon graduation. I remember sitting with my mother and her letting me know how much we had set aside for school, reviewing the packages that both schools offered, and what I would be taking out for student loans. So she allowed me to make that decision on my own. But looking back, knowing how long it took me to save for that bag, I think it sort of made me realize how long it could potentially be to pay back my student loans. So just having those experiences, talking about money openly with my mother, even though it was something my grandmother had instilled in us not to do, was one of the best decisions I have ever made. So it's really important to talk about your finances, talk about your financial well-being, just as much as it is talk about your mental well-being. So ask for help when you are unsure of something. It's important to build a long-term financial plan that can guide you through every stage of your life, whether it's expected or unexpected events that do pop up. But we're able to help you talk about your finances and build your confidence as you go through your life journey.
Yeah, that's great. It's tremendous advice. I didn't know about that Louis Vuitton bag story. I'm going to have to ask you offline if you're planning on selling it and lock in your gains in case there's a crash in the Louis Vuitton industry. But what was your turning point? What made you decide that you wanted to help people with their finances? And then was there a separate moment where you felt like primarily I would like to help women like me?
I think it's really important for women to be independent. You never know what life will throw your way. And oftentimes, if you're not prepared, we can see events really impact women's finances in a negative way. It doesn't need to be that way. And most of the time, the solutions aren't that complicated. I'm passionate about educating my clients to build confidence in their future. Women face a lot of setbacks when it comes to their finances. We talked about just a few of them today: having children, taking time off of work, caring for elderly parents or other family members, loss of a spouse, loss of job, even divorce. I want women to be prepared for these events. Some of them are expected, some are not. We have the knowledge and tools here at Heritage to help educate and prepare you so that if life does throw you a curveball, we're right next to you to help you get back on your path. Sometimes you might need to change that path, and that's okay. There are hard issues to deal with, and you don't need to do it alone.
So one of the things I've already touched on in our conversation was our Her Heritage initiative. And one of the things that came out of that is a newsletter that is targeted to our female clients and contacts. Can you explain a little bit about that newsletter and why people may be interested in subscribing to it?
Her Heritage is a quarterly newsletter put out by the women here at Heritage, where we celebrate the natural traits that make women ideal investors and look to help women build confidence around creating a strong financial future. You'll typically see tips on building wealth, healthy living recommendations around health and exercise, recipes and hobbies. We'll share books that we're reading here at the firm or podcast recommendations. We'll also provide you with resources that you can use to share with friends or family members, like a budget worksheet, college savings calculators, or our reflection on my Heritage workbook. And every so often, we have some fun family photos to share what's going on in our lives.
Great. It's something I know that you've spent a lot of time along with our colleagues here building out, and I would encourage listeners who got something out of this conversation to go to our website, to the Her Heritage section, and subscribe to make sure they're getting the newsletter if they aren't already. So, Kenzie, you've been here at Heritage working with our clients for the last 15 years. Over that time, you've gained a lot of insight to share with our listeners broadly, but also more specifically to this topic of women in investing. What are the main points that you want to make sure our listeners take away from our discussion today?
So some solutions we talked about today: get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Start that conversation with family and friends about your finances. Prepare early on. Create a roadmap that can help you make decisions that will get you to your goals and feel empowered. Address your personal situation. Plan for the expected and the unexpected. What are you concerned about most? Let's address that and take the worry off your shoulders. What are some of the common fears you have? Lost a job, being widowed. We can illustrate worst case scenarios into your financial plan to help you plan for that event in the case that something does happen. That can help you bring confidence and a better understanding to your financial situation and the impact of that event. So let us help you build a plan.
Notice one thing you didn't have on there so far, sorry to interrupt, is things like don't look at your portfolio daily, don't panic about market moves, don't get emotional with your investing strategy. Because that would be something I tell people all the time. But is that something that you found that women are just you're not as worried about with them in general?
I tend to see that women are more concerned with their long-term financial plan. Am I going to be okay? Do I have enough assets? I don't want to be the bag lady. Than they are with the portfolio.
On a day-to-day basis, or comparing their returns to friends or colleagues.
Absolutely.
So, one takeaway then for me as an advisor working with clients that, the clients themselves should have is make sure you're getting out of your meetings with your advisor and your conversation with the spouse an understanding of the big picture. And not, short-term relative performance or what's been going on this quarter, but, I want the meetings to instill enough confidence in me as to how things look long-term and focus on that much more on the short-term stuff that ultimately is noise in terms of like a market performance over a few months or even a few years.
Absolutely.
Great. I enjoy talking to you as always. I've been doing it for years and years about these topics, and I love the fact that we have this podcast and we can share the insights more broadly with our listeners.
Thanks, Sammy.
Thank you for listening to Wealthy Behavior. If you found the conversation useful, please leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts and share this episode so those around you can live a rich life too. We appreciate your feedback and questions. Please email us at wealthybehavior@heritagefinancial.net. For more insights, subscribe to our weekly blog at heritagefinancial.net and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Check out my personal finance blog at thebostonadvisor.com. Wealthy Behavior is produced by Kristen Kastner and Michelle Kakamis.
This educational podcast is brought to you by Heritage Financial Services, LLC, located in the greater Boston area. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are that of the speaker, are subject to change, and do not constitute investment advice or a recommendation regarding any specific product or security. There is no guarantee that any investment or strategy discussed will be successful or will achieve any particular level of results. Investing involves risks, including the potential loss of principal. There has not been and will not be any compensation exchanged between Heritage Financial Services and podcast guests or recommended resources.